People who knew murderers, when did you know something was off? I didn't. He was the sweetest, kindest, gentle giant kind of guy. Kind of a weirdo, but still a great guy overall. I remember once that he shed a tear just by talking about his kid, because he was so filled with emotion from having him in his life. He turned out to kill his wife, kidnap his child, start the longest Amber Alert in the history of Canada. As he tried escaping to a different province, he killed another man to steal his car. I'm still unsure today if I should have seen anything at any point. It comes to haunt my nightmares from time to time. I moved to a new town when I was 19 and was making new friends at my new job. I met this girl at work and she invited me over to hang out with her and her best friend. I went and the best friend's boyfriend was there and the vibes were way off. I was uncomfortable, he was cold, and just seemed angry for no reason. They had mentioned to me before he got there that he was always controlling and had hit the girl before. Turns out controlling was an understatement. She came home one day and he was digging a hole in the backyard and she asked what he was doing and he replied, "Digging your grave." He hit her, said if he can't have her, nobody could have her, all of that. So eventually she left him and had to get a restraining order and everything. He somehow persuaded her to get in a car with him on her work break and they went missing for a few days. Turns out he stabbed her to death, threw her in a river and killed himself. I met the girl only a few times and him only the once, but the face that I was in such close proximity to someone capable of that gives me chills. She was so young, it was really sad. I went through primary and high school with a guy in the year below me who seemed a little distant. We lived near each other and caught the bus from the same stop. He was a bit of a bully, but it was something more. Like you could tell he wasn't a bully because he was hurting inside or because he felt threatened in some way. He was a bully because he did what he wanted to do and didn't realize that it hurt other people. Like the kind of kid who enjoyed pulling wings off flies. Not long after I left my hometown, I heard that he had been charged with the murder of a 2-year-old. Apparently his girlfriend at the time left her daughter with him for an hour or so while she ran an errand. He couldn't deal with the toddler crying anymore, so he beat her. He caused severe internal bleeding and she died in hospital not long after. He would have been around 22 when he did it. He was sentenced to 36 years with a non-parole period of 27 years. Edit. This happened in Australia around 2014. My uncle murdered somebody and is currently serving life in prison. From my earliest memory I knew he had some screws loose. Edit. I was at work when I originally commented, so I didn't have time to provide details. He caught his wife at her lover's house, so he shot the guy. He was going to shoot her too, but she convinced him she wouldn't tell anyone. He burned the guy's house down in an attempt to cover his tracks. As soon as his wife could get free of him, she immediately reported him. As far as me saying I always got creep vibes from him, he always reminded me of a poor man's Charles Manson. https://www.bailbonds.hq.com/mississippi/ms.-inmate-roland/L4329 . I worked with someone that killed someone in self-defense. I didn't believe his story, which is probably why he served time for the incident. The story he told was that he was having sex with some girl and her husband came home and found them and immediately attacked him. He said he didn't want to fight him but killed him in self-defense. Some months after we hired him, we got word that he also had some child molestation in his criminal record. Once that word spread around, he disappeared. He had stolen some stuff from coworkers before he left. 2 weeks later he was robbed and killed outside a bar near work. Not my experience, but my grandmother's. She got pregnant at 15 by my grandfather and had to get married, 1960s. He was extremely abusive and my grandmother went to the police multiple times because she felt like he would wind up killing someone, but they just didn't take it seriously and ignored her. He later went on to strangle and beat a 14-year-old girl to death with a baseball bat just a couple years later. Edit. I am editing to include this because I've seen a couple people asking, speculating, but my grandmother did get away from him. They had been separated when this happened, and he was put in prison. But I do know he got out, and from what I was told, it was on insanity. I'm not 100% on the details of his release as he is a pretty taboo topic. But he finally died in 2014, though I didn't find that out until a year later. I had only ever met him once. And thank you guys for your words. I wasn't expecting this to get the attention it did, so I'm still going through comments. My ex-coworker was always a huge dick who nobody liked to work with. He'd always be on his phone and talking to someone, even when he had a customer waiting to order in the drive-thru. The moment I knew he had something wrong with him was when I caught him, looking for his dab pen, in one of the lockers in the back room. He always used a top locker, but he was searching through one at the bottom, which happened to be my locker for the day. I told him that, so he just stared me in the face for a second, and walked away. Later that same year, I learned that he shot and killed someone at a gas station. Edit. To clarify, he was, most likely, trying to steal from me, and the fact that he made up his lie on the fly set me off, not to mention the creepy stare at the end. I knew this kid my entire life. We were friends in elementary and middle school, more middle school. He was your typical redneck kid but a kind person. Imagine if Pinky from Pinky and the Brain grew up in the rural South. Well, as people do in school, we drifted apart. He honestly wasn't the person in the group I was friends with, he was just in that circle. So we went about our lives. A year after we graduated in the same town we all grew up in, he killed his entire family. Mother, brother, stepsister, father. Just for no reason. Nothing really provoked him from my understanding. He left and went to ride ATVs with his friend later that day. They caught him and he had no memory of it. He went to court and got life and never could recount a single moment, at least he said. It was weird seeing this kid who was to your knowledge just dumber than a bag of hammers, yet a odd innocence to him, on trail for such atrocities. He just sat stone-faced the entire time. Almost like he didn't understand what had happened. Not to say I felt bad for him, but I felt something, sadness perhaps. Kid I went to school with from 5th to 8th grade. He was always a dick. Typical class clown but with a mean streak. When we hit middle school he was always making comments about, to girls that were incredibly inappropriate. I never liked him and hated being around him. He ended up getting into meth and shot his mom and dad in their sleep while high. His mom died and his dad survived but was severely injured. Last I heard he was crying crocodile tears saying he regrets everything and wants another chance. But knowing him, it's total bullshit. He deserves to rot. Edit. Should probably add he shot his parents when he was in his later years of high school. I only went to school with him from 5th to 8th because I changed schools. The dad was very physically abusive and controlling towards his 7-year-old son. This was probably when I was 12 or something like that. My parents and I lived in a townhouse complex and we befriended a family because they were Romanian like us, and they had a son that was my brother's age. Anyways, the parents sent the kid off to Europe for the summer to spend time with his grandparents. During that time, the dad installed hidden cameras throughout the house and caught his wife cheating on him. Instead of being a reasonable person and just divorcing her, he ended up murdering her in her sleep with a shotgun. My parents ended up clearing their house and there was blood splatter on the carpet. The guy got life in jail, and the son is still in Europe and is being sheltered from what actually happened to his mom by the dad's parents. The grandparents told him she died in a car accident. Also, not to mention the father refused to let him get adopted by his best friend that lives here in Canada, or by his mom's sister in England. I talked to the son maybe 2 years ago and he was still devastated about his mom, and absolutely clueless about the monster who is his father. The first time I met him, Jose, was a friend of my ex and something immediately seemed off. He was sneaky, always lying and cheating, but not good at it cause he was dumb, and a total narcissist as well. I told my ex to keep his distance, that Jose would only get him into some shit. Not only did he set my ex up to be robbed, Jose snitched on a bunch of other people, and finally snapped on Stranger in a fit of roid rage and stabbed him. The guy he killed was fairly young and a good kid, just in the wrong place at the time. I hope that asshole rots in prison. Edited to clear up any confusion. Never. He was a seemingly happy kid who brought a backpack full of, probably stolen, SNES games over to my place pretty regularly. The last time I posted this, I said he killed another teen in a drug-related turf war. I looked up his case afterwards and it was actually 2. I worked at a box store about 20 years ago, A guy the first worked with was always off and would give away pocket knives to other employees. One day he came in with scratches all over his face. He had raped and murdered a disabled girl the day before, using a pocket knife he had given our coworker later that day. Edit. In prison until 2051, https://www.inmate-profiles/harold-brown-0784901 closing parenthesis. I was friends with a girl whose dad ended up being discovered as a serial killer. I never discussed it with her, but she's very defensive over it from what I've heard. My bio dad ended up murdering my stepmom. Everyone in my family, my mom and two older brothers, definitely knew that something was up. He had severe anger issues and was very abusive. Some of the earlier memories I have are of him choking one of my brothers. He even almost choked my mom to death a couple of times. Obviously my mom was smart and divorced him as he didn't want to see him kill my brothers. Years later I come home from school and my mom and stepdad take us all to the side and tell us he shot our stepmom and was currently in jail. None of us were surprised. If anything, I was just so grateful my mom left him. It's so strange that I am directly related to a murderer. A great uncle shot one of my great-great uncles for trying to fondle or rape another family member. Turns out everybody was tired of his shit, so the killing was never reported. Nobody quite knows where the body is buried, but my guess is that he threw it into the river. We were a dictatorship at the time, so seeing bodies flushed down the river was not uncommon. The moment he told me that back home in Russia he once shot a guy who kept insulting him. Weirdest wedding party encounter ever, but it seems I'm distantly related to a murderer since around 13 years or so. Oh. Not mine, but my wife's story. She attended Columbine HS at the time of the shooting. She said she never could have expected the shooters to do what they did. They were just weird, not too dissimilar to any other weird kid, but they didn't talk about what they were planning in public. I'm purposely omitting their names, cause fuck 'em. When he came looking for me because I was the only one that knew of the abandoned mine we both found when exploring as kids. It had been years since we had talked and he suddenly showed up looking for me. He killed his roommate because he was gay and made a pass at him. Dumped the body in the mine in Boulder County, Colorado. Honestly, this girl I went to school with killed two kids she babysat and their mother. Before that, I would have told you she was one of the calmest, coolest people in our school. Would have never suspected her to do something like that. I just realized that I have two scenarios that are similar enough to mention. 1. I went to the same high school as the chick who gained infamy in the US for convincing her boyfriend to kill himself and then running all these charity events for him before getting caught. The text messages were public record and absolutely chilling. I think she ended up getting off with manslaughter, but the case is being appealed and will likely go to the Supreme Court. She was extremely forgettable in high school, nothing remarkable whatsoever. 2. While I was in college I worked in the bookstore over the summers. I worked with a guy there who was a decent guy but always a little weird. He'd make inappropriate comments about some of the students that would come in for books etc. but seemed harmless. He ended up being charged for attempted murder after stabbing his wife multiple times. I believe an affair was involved. The only reason the poor women lived was because a construction worker saw the attack and intervened. So shout out to that guy for having balls of steel. Edit. Forgot to mention I had a friend in college who lived on the same street as the poor kid who killed himself. I'm sure it won't be a surprise, but he had a terrible, tough life according to my buddy, and that was well known by the people in his neighborhood town. The murderer I know was more of an acquaintance or casual friend. He lived down the hall from me and we hung out sometimes, but not like just the two of us. Still, we'd chill at each other's place regularly. I passed him one day in the stairwell and I said hi. He said hi back but called me by the wrong name. He was really distracted and kind of awkward. He didn't make eye contact and kept moving. I remember thinking maybe we don't know each other as well as I thought. Later he was playing Nintendo, yep, my N64. This was a while ago, with my roommate when I came home. He apologized and said his mind was elsewhere. A couple days later there are cops all over the building, interviewing people and searching his place. They'd found the guy's roommate with a bullet in the back of his head in an abandoned lot across town. The next day he confessed. Looking back, I should have known immediately, but I didn't even know what I was seeing. In 2016, I was working as a server, and one of my coworkers was always complaining about her shitty husband and how they always fought. They were from Chicago, and kind of just always loud and aggressive, so I didn't think much of it. One night, they both came in for dinner and drinks and sat in my section, and I was looking forward to finally meeting her husband so I could give him a face. I just remember not being able to look him in the eye, feeling super uncomfortable any time I needed to go over to their table, because my friend would try to spark convo, and I wanted to talk to her, but the guy's presence just sitting there would make my skin crawl. They left that night, but soon she stopped coming to work, and then, a couple weeks later, news broke about the murder-suicide, husband being the murderer. It was heartbreaking. And I no longer take lightly word of domestic disputes. When he said there was a teenager, his mother and his stepfather lived around the corner from me. My mother knew them better than myself, but we all thought they were lovely. A couple of years ago the son went to the hospital several times asking for help. He claimed he had voices telling him to kill his stepfather, but each time he went he was released and told to come back. They would give an appointment. A few weeks later, during a small argument, he stabbed his stepfather to death in the front garden. He turned himself in the next day, and wasn't convicted as he sought help before it happened. Instead, he got the treatment he needed. Edit. I see a lot of people wondering if it might have been a defense-planned murder. It wasn't. The way he was killed, and how the son acted after, removed any doubt. Obligatory didn't know him as a friend, but a regular customer in my shop. He would come in after his shift to buy beer and tobacco. On one occasion he caught and helped us to evict a shoplifter. He seemed friendly enough. Then a local girl went missing and was eventually pulled out of a river a few weeks later. They announced they were looking for somebody in connection with her death, and it was him. They had CCTV footage of him tailing her through a park and footage of him buying beer in a shop, still unconfirmed to this day being our shop as they blurred out the surroundings. Anyway, as we had a TV in our shop switched to the news channel as it was a rolling story local to us, we started to discuss the guy, if we saw him on the day she went missing, that kind of thing. We hadn't, but it was at that point when one of my staff, a young girl, who had previously said to management that she didn't want to work the closing shift anymore because there was too many creepy men around, told us that he used to stare at her when he came into the store in a way that made her uncomfortable enough to not want to be on the floor when he came in. They never got to question him about the murder as he was found dead in a local park a few days later. He'd hung himself. Had an employee on my work crew, acted strange and wouldn't listen to direction. Had goofy huge sideburns, ended up going to jail for a short time. When he got out he shot his GF and her parents. Thanks for watching. See you later.